Welcome back, everybody. I could not be more excited about today's show. Jason, it's a couple weeks in the making. We got a big name guy in the show today. We won't say his name yet, even though everybody knows because they clicked it. But what are your thoughts on our illustrious guest?
Oh, this is going to be awesome. I've been geeking out over this with you over the last few days, just talking about it, excited about this moment. So, yeah, I'm pumped. This is, talking with Mr. Dolan, which everybody knows, is going to be freaking fantastic. So,
Yeah,
I'm looking
a
forward
long
to
time
it.
in the making. We've been in communication for a while. Sometimes things get lost, emails get lost, long story short, we're not recording on a usual day. You folks are seeing us on a normal day, but when it comes to chatting with people with this amount of experience, this kind of an open mindset, and he's never stepped wrong. He's not been, caught with a fake UFO video or trying to make money or any hoax. Richard is factual, on point. He doesn't step astray. So I'm super pumped. Right now is the best part of my day because I get to say, we'll be right back with Mr. Richard Dolan on UAP Studies Podcast. Welcome back, everyone, to a very amazing episode of UAP Studies Podcast. My name is Louis Borges. Joining me, as always, my good friend and illustrious co-host, Mr. Jason Gilmet.
How's it going? This is a good day, isn't it, Louis?
It is a very good day. It's anytime I get to welcome in the show a legend of this caliber, it's my favorite thing to do. And I mean, for the one guy in the whole UFO world who doesn't know our guest, I'll just tell you a little bit about him. But obviously, an award-winning author, at least 8 books that I could find just doing my futile studying online, television and film presenter. You've seen him on doing cameo bits, and also running the whole show. Some of the TV shows like Hangar One, UFO Files, Ancient Aliens, The Underground, Sci-Fi's, Investigates. I could go on and on and on. We are very excited to welcome to the show today, Mr. Richard Dolan.
Thank you very much. You mentioned Sci-Fi Investigates. I got a little bit of a chuckle, I have to say. That's 15, 16, 8, no, a long time ago.
Yeah. Hence your
that was a fun show.
You've been doing this a long time in a field where people are throwing stones. And we were kind of chatting briefly about that. And the only way you really have staying power is to be like yourself and the likes of Stanton Friedman, Jacques Vallée, tried, tested, you take it seriously. In fact, your wife we were chatting with, she goes, "Oh, we like the fact that you guys dress up and take it seriously. And we only interview people that do the same. So we're extremely happy to have you. It's been a long time in the making. But for, again, those of you who obviously know your UFO career, we want to learn a little bit about you before all of this. So tell us a bit about who was Richard Dolan before UFOs.
My God. Well, thank you. It's really, I'm glad I'm here. I'm glad we got to make this happen. Well, earlier, my last birthday, I turned 60. I'm 60 now.
You're 60. You look great.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I mean, I wasn't trying to aim for that, but
you don't look a day over fabulous. All right.
I'm amazed. I'm amazed at it when I think. So I was born in the early 60s and in the New York City area. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up there, grew up on Long Island. I used to have the accent really strong, kind of went away. When I was a kid, I alternated between wanting to be a baseball star and some kind of writer. And I actually did go back and forth. I didn't have the talent for baseball. And so I went into the university world. I studied literature, I studied politics, studied history, kind of fell in love with history and literature and philosophy. I was all about liberal arts. I thought I would like to be a professor of history at some university. That's really what I thought my goal was going to be through all of my 20s. I was a very serious student. I was pretty good at what I did, I feel. And I just, I was a sponge. I just wanted to absorb everything that I could absorb about European history, and American history, and world history. And it was in the early 1990s. I was still like in this mode. I was working on a PhD in U.S. national security, strategy, diplomacy, and so forth. And I was at a New Age bookstore in the city of Syracuse, New York. I'll never forget this. And I saw a UFO book on the book stand. And it was Timothy Good's very classic work, Above Top Secret. I think this was 1993. I actually can't remember the exact year. I think it was 93. So this book had been out for a little while, but I had not heard of it. And for those who don't know, it's a very fat book. And I just remember flipping through it, thinking, I didn't know anything about UFOs. I knew nothing, but I knew a lot about history, and I'm seeing names in the book that I recognized from my academic research. But I'm seeing that here in this book, Timothy Good's putting them in this UFO context. And it was very jarring to me. I kept thinking, wait, what? I read his diaries. I didn't know about anything concerning UFOs. I read all about that department. They were doing UFOs. Why was I not informed? This type of thing. And so I was curious. I think that's really what it was. I thought, this looks like a serious book. He seems to have put it together pretty well. I could tell that an academic professor probably wouldn't count it, but I thought, looks like he did a pretty good job. I'd like to know more. So I bought the book and I read it, and I got online with what was the internet at the time. This is all this is all like very basic interface. There's no graphic anything. It was all bulletin boards. But there were a couple of UFO groups that were out there, and I got into that. And the next thing I knew, I just became obsessed with this subject, because what started out, it was basically me just thinking, you know what? I don't like having this big question mark hanging over my head. Like, I'm studying American policy of the 1940s and early 50s. And here I'm encountering all these UFO people who are focusing on 1947 and the early 1950s. And it was weird. I thought, if there's anything to this, I would like to know. And if there's nothing to it, I'd like to know that as well. So I thought I would take literally 2, maybe 3 months out of my life, read a few books, and decide, like, is there something to this or not? That's how simple my thought process was back then. And what ended up happening is, well, I bought Good's book, as I said, and I thought that was very good. And I started buying a few other books, and I looked for government documents through Freedom of Information. And the next thing I knew, I was completely hooked. I was like down the rabbit hole. And I laugh now when I think back, oh yeah, I could just settle this in 3 months. Like, no, not exactly. But what did happen is I became persuaded early on that, not that UFOs necessarily were alien at that time. I was a lot more conservative back then. And but I did conclude that this was a historical phenomenon that had been taken seriously by the highest level individuals within the American national security community. So that was absolutely unarguable. And then that led to the next question. Why were they interested? And I quickly learned, well, there were a lot of violations of very sensitive airspace by objects that were not supposed to exist, that were said to be shaped like flying saucers. Well, that's interesting. Next question, did they ever resolve this? Did they figure it out? I looked through it, and no, they clearly didn't figure it out. Next question, where was the media in all of this? Where was the academic community? Like all the professors, the smart professors who think they know everything. Where are the politicians? Well, that led me into a study of manipulation of media, of politics, and of the academic community by the intelligence community. And you just go on and on. I mean, it just became a series of the most intense rabbit holes, but it's not just one rabbit hole, I wish it were that easy. It's like in the movie The Matrix, one of the great movies of all time. Morpheus gives Neo the red pill. It's like, here's the truth, dude. If it were only that easy, if there were only just one pill you have to take. What really is the case is it's like you're walking through life with all these veils in front of you, and finally you realize, oh wow, there's this veil in front of me blocking my vision. So you finally rip it and you see a little bit better, but then you realize there are more veils and you have to keep ripping those. And each time your vision gets a little bit better, but I'm still, I've been doing this now for 30 years and I'm still ripping through more veils.
Wow. And you've developed quite the style too. And I mean, for me, though, I think I've obviously seen you on TV for years, but the first interview I saw you really conduct was in 2013. And it was with like a dying CIA agent, essentially. He had a few months to live, he thought, because his kidneys were failing. And he basically told a story of, you know, Area 51 being real. And he worked with the government and part of teams that would fly
Yes.
around and go to Italy and everywhere else. And he is just so believable. And why would you want to fake that as your last like will and testament? You know, like I think everybody becomes a little spiritual when it's, you know, time to meet the maker. You're not going to really do that devious of an act 3 months before, you know, you're going to expire. So for me, it was amazing that you got somebody with that story willing to talk to you. And I assume the gentleman has passed since then, but maybe you can talk
Yes,
a little
yes.
bit about that.
Yes, I'm actually very glad you did. So first of all, I have to give props to Linda Moulton Howe on this, because that man was originally her witness. She had interviewed him many years prior when his health was much better, and his story was quite consistent with her, by the way. I didn't know this when I was asked to interview him. I was actually asked by Steve Bassett, who was, this is during the time of the citizen hearings on disclosure, which was in 2013. And long story short, there were other people involved in this, but I was asked to interview this man. So I went up there, we drove up to northern Minnesota. We had to fly there, and then we drove from Minneapolis. It was quite a long drive and icy. It was wintertime. And we met at a very like tiny little motel. I met him and I met his son-in-law. I'm very glad I met this man's son-in-law. And incidentally, so the gentleman was not a CIA agent. He was inaccurately portrayed in the YouTube video as that. But what he was I'm trying to get this right from memories, a decade ago, U.S. Army, who was brought in to coordinate with CIA, as he said it. So he was working in the United States. He originally said to me that his job was actually to coordinate with CIA overseas, and they were analyzing UFO photographs. And somehow he was roped into doing this. I can't remember the detail why, but then what he stated that his supervisor went to the White House. This is under Dwight Eisenhower in the very late 1950s. And they, according to what he said, went to Area 51, where he encountered a variety of craft that he saw, and stated, boy, you know, this has been a while since I've even reviewed my notes on him, but he stated that the most dramatic thing was that there was a glass, I think there was a glass window, and beyond that he saw an alien being, and he believed he had a telepathic message, which was something like, "We mean you no harm," or words to that effect. I'll say this about him. You know, I don't think he was deceptive in any way. I'll never believe that. I had an experience with my own father toward the end of his life. My dad was a New York City cop, and I will just say I knew every single story from my dad's career. He repeated them countless times. I knew them by heart. And I know that toward the end of my dad's life, his stories started to change. And I said to him, "Hey, that's not how that thing went down." And he would say, no, that's exactly how it happened. But I know it wasn't the case. So I wondered about this gentleman. He was quite elderly. And but here's the thing. I spoke to his son-in-law behind the scenes. And the son-in-law said, "My father-in-law has been telling this story consistently for years." There were one or two things. I don't think that they made it to the YouTube video because we spoke for a long time. There were one or two things this man said that the son-in-law said I'd never heard before. So that makes me wonder. But I think overall this man was truthful. And I will say, since he's now passed away, and he absolutely never wanted this out, and but he's gone. He talked very openly about domestic CIA assassination teams back in the 1950s and presumably the 60s. He seemed to have absolutely no question about it, which may not sound like a radical thing in the world that we live in today. But for him, it was a very, very important thing. And he did not, he literally whispered into my ear. We're in a hotel room, and he wouldn't even say it out loud in the hotel room. So of all the things that he said to me, that was the thing that actually struck me as the most dramatic. Seeing an alien, that's absolutely top notch. Seeing alien craft, yes, absolutely. But here's this man telling me about CIA domestic hit squads. I thought very interesting. But yes, I believed him. I certainly believed his honesty. I will say, just because someone is honest doesn't mean that what they're saying is 100% confirmable. And there's still things that he said I don't know how to confirm or disprove some of his claims, but it was an interesting interview, and I'm glad I got to do it.
Nice. And I want to ask you about like the global UFO or UAP events right now. So it seems like we haven't had anything good since 2017. Where like we have this.
Are you talking about the event in Europe Europe right now?
Yeah. So there's a few things happening worldwide. So I thought maybe you could fill us in on what you know of what's taken place.
Probably not a lot. I'm not involved with that. I'm not affiliated with it, and I'm not really sure what their focus is, to be honest with you. It's probably something I should know. There have been a number of UFO initiatives that have sprung up just among people, among academic types and others, and some of them I think are really interesting. This one I can't really say very much about, unfortunately.
Yeah, apparently, was it San Marino, some tiny little country off the Italian coast? Right. They're petitioning the UN to take this seriously, and it almost seems like they're doing the betting for somebody else. It's like they have a ticket that doesn't really matter one way or the other. So, but it's like the US doesn't want to use theirs or anyone else, or have to answer the barrage of questions that's going to come with, why would you bring that to the UN? So it almost seems like they're just being used for that. But regardless, I think that's an awesome
thing. They want an annual conference. I think they're kind of positioning themselves for an annual event. I thought that's the impression I got.
Yeah, possibly.
And the UN initiative. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's possible. I mean, look, the United Nations is dominated by the United States and its allies, and the UN almost never does anything that the US doesn't want it to do. And the US is run by hardcore empire builders, national security people, neocons, essentially. If they allow this to proceed, well, I'll be a little bit surprised. This initiative, there was something like this back in the late 1970s, as many people know. The tiny little nation of Grenada, maybe a tiny bit larger than San Marino. They also, led by their prime minister, a man named Sir Edward Gary. He'd been a UFO witness. He was into UFOs. He rounds up a bunch of UFO researchers, J. Allen Hynek, Leonard Stringfield, a bunch of other people, and made a pretty good go at it. Jacques Vallée was there. A lot of people were there. And it absolutely was squashed by U.S. and UK intelligence. They killed it behind the scenes. So I don't know. This one, we're in a slightly different world today, where in public we're able to discuss UAP now much more openly than before. So that's not a terrible thing. That's a good thing. Pardon me. The real question is, how far can this conversation really go?
Right.
And is it being positioned in a way to sanitize it, to defang it, which I don't know that was the intention of the original folks who really pushed to get this out in the open. I'm not saying Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, or the journalists, Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Kean. I'm not saying that was their intention, but I do think that when you are a faction that takes on the national security state, that has a vested interest in managing this subject the way they do, it's going to be very tough to outsmart them. This is like a chess game where they're grandmasters. And what have they done? They have taken this narrative, just the UFO subject gets pushed out into the open over the last 5 years. And many people, the New York Times made it happen. I always felt that the New York Times leadership, above Leslie and Ralph, was very much wanting to put this out there only to get out ahead of the story because it was inevitable that was going to come out. TTSA had done their press conference. Elizondo and Mellon were about to release those videos. There was nothing to stop it. And I think that Leslie and Ralph convinced the New York Times to take the story. New York Times actually forced as skeptical a spin on it as you could imagine. In one of those two stories that came out in 2017, they had people like skeptic James Oberk quoted and this skeptic Yale nobody who had nothing to do with UFOs. They throw these skeptical voices out there. So it wasn't as if the New York Times was sanctioning a UFO disclosure. I think what we're seeing is factions fighting it out. That's what I've always believed since just about the beginning. I think you're seeing a, let's say, a partial, let's open this up a bit faction. I don't think they're for full disclosure, but yes, I think that there is an interest in opening the subject up a bit. And then you're seeing a faction that's like, absolutely no way, and we will stop this with every inch of our, every fiber of our being. And I think that has not ended. So what we're seeing is there's permission now in the mainstream, very controlled media to talk a little bit, once in a while, a tiny bit about UAP. And even that's almost gone away. I mean, who's really talking about it? Tucker Carlson once in a while. And in America, he's about it. That's it, among the mainstream. But when it's discussed, no conspiracies, no, don't talk about abductions, don't talk about crash retrievals, don't talk about acquired technology, don't talk about conspiracies, don't talk about a cover-up, don't talk about lies and government complicity, because we're in an era in which you're not supposed to believe in conspiracy theories. What is bigger than the UFO cover? There's no conspiracy bigger than this one. I mean, maybe 9/11, okay, maybe COVID, okay. UFOs arguably can be the biggest of all. And so it would be an extremely awkward, to say the least, position for the US government to say, well, don't believe in any of these other conspiracies. Yeah, the UFO one, that's kind of true. Okay, we did lie about that one. But all the other ones, those are just conspiracy theories. Like, they can't do that. So the UFO cover-up, there are certain red lines that cannot be crossed. And the primary red line is that one that implicates the US government in a cover-up. And that means no talk about crash retrievals, no talk about acquisition of any kind of exotic hardware. Although anyone who has looked into this field with any amount of diligence and care knows there's an overwhelming preponderance of testimony that speaks to this. Good testimony, a lot of it. There's a lot to say. And so I guess what I'm saying is I think the conversation is still very tightly controlled. And the United States government has extremely close relationships with all the big tech and obviously with all the legacy media. They are able to get their messaging out very, very well. And I don't see that changing as long as this entire system stays in place. So as long as the Washington nexus of power remains where it is, I don't think it's going to change.
So where do you think that leaves these U.S., congressional hearings and reports? And for me, it looks like show. I don't think they can admit openly that we've been lying for 70 years without totally losing everybody's whatever faith they have in the government. So, but I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on the last 2 years of UFO reporting, according to the government?
Well, let's talk about the last one first. One from last, was it late May? Ronald Moultrie and Scott Bray were the two who were there. I mean, on a certain level, I felt bad for these two guys. Obviously, I don't think they knew anything of substance about the UFO subject. If they did, they certainly weren't showing it. They go up there and, Moultrie, I recall him saying, he basically gave the line that the United States Air Force was giving in the 1950s. So we've graduated to that level where the Air Force at their famous press conference all those 70 plus years ago said, well, there's something out there. We don't know what it is, but it's nothing for anyone to worry about. We can handle it. It's not aliens. There's no evidence. That's exactly what Moultrie said. He said, well, with enough evidence, information, we know that we can identify, and then he said, mitigate all of these objects. I kept thinking, you're not mitigating anything. You haven't mitigated this for 70 plus years. You think you're going to be in control of this situation now? But their whole point was to downplay this to the public, to gather it in bureaucratic language and make it as boring a presentation as possible. Well, they succeeded there. They did say that there were some unexplained, unknown reports. They got their number up to about 400, they said. This is over a 20-year span, though. I personally, for the 21st century, have roughly 400 U.S. military UFO encounters that I've collected. So I mean, I'm one person on my own. You can't tell me that the best they could do is 400 reports. That the ones that I've collected aren't all declassified military documents. I collect a lot of things that are in the public domain, witness testimony and the like. But hey, if it involves a chase by a jet of an unknown craft, that counts in my book. So that goes in my database. So they said that they had all of these reports, but they didn't describe really any of them. And in the statement that just recently came out, they described zero. They didn't describe a single case. They will not. They'll never do that unless they are absolutely forced, and no one's forcing them. Congress is a bunch of national security lapdogs. Does anyone really think that they have any independence on this matter? I don't. I know a few people behind the scenes who have belief and faith in some of these members of Congress. I'm just not one of them. So I think what we're looking at is a situation where these guys, I'm talking about the people who really manage this bureaucracy of secrecy, if they could drag the secrecy out for another 5 years, they'll do that. If they could drag it out for 50 years, they will do that. If they could drag it out for 500, they'll do that. So they'll take it for as long as they can. And, so the fact that we now acknowledge UAP, whereas a little over 5 years ago, we didn't, or they didn't, you could say that's a win. Okay, I'll agree with that. But think of it as like a football game. You got 100 yards and they're playing defense. You're on your own 10-yard line, and you force the defense to move back, 5 yards. So, okay, good. Now you're on your 15-yard line. But they're still playing good defense, and they will do everything possible to stop forward motion on this matter. And now, of course, we're going into an era which we're looking at a globalist revolution. It's happening right all around us. It's a national security revolution. It's a 24/7 surveillance revolution. It's a digital revolution, a panopticon. I mean, there will be no privacy for anybody. There will be fewer and fewer jobs. I mean, we have an AI revolution happening right now that's scaring the living hell out of a lot of people. What are people going to do? Well, one thing they won't be allowed to do, I think, is protest and complain. And I think we're already seeing that around a lot of the world. So I think in the UFO phenomenon, the UFO field, rather, we're going to be seeing an ever tightening of what is permissible. There will be certain things that are continued to be permissible, and other things such as cover-up and criminal cover-up, which I think increasingly are going to be just shunted aside. It'll be not proper to talk about these things. And you can already see the writing on the wall with this, as far as I can tell.
It's funny too, because when all this took place, they announced that they're going to form this task force, and we're all happy about it. These clandestine organizations that have been running the show for all these years, they're not just going to disappear and wither away in the darkness. They're still active. They're still doing their jobs. The job might have changed, their tactics might have changed, but they're still there. They didn't go away. And so we have this progress in the sense of, okay, maybe, global consciousness of the issue, but there's still going to be groups out there that it's in their best interests and interests of whoever is above them to keep this down low. And so we're competing against these two groups. And I'm sorry, those two guys that are part of that, the new task force, I don't think they know what the hell they're doing. They have no knowledge or background really on UFOs or UAPs. Why have they contacted people like yourself who have been researching this for years, that this is the team that I would assemble, not, oh, let's start from scratch. I got this, hold my beer. This is a sort of attitude that we have, right?
You're laboring under the assumption, a good assumption, a noble assumption, that we have a system that actually is designed to do what we think it's supposed to do, and it just is not.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the military and the national security community. You're right; they're not going away. I do think we want to keep a close eye on events in the coming year, because I do wonder if outside events having nothing to do with UFOs may actually shake up the United States military in a way that might affect UFOs. And I'm talking about the war in Ukraine. And look, I have a lot of thoughts about that. I talk about this on my website quite a bit. But what I will say is whether you side with one of the combatants or the other, it's become quite clear that Ukraine has its game, set, match. Ukraine has, I would say, zero chance of winning this war, particularly on the terms that they've set out, which is the recapture of Crimea. It's not going to happen, not even remote. I've followed those events very carefully. And so what's happened is that the United States military is going to be in a very awkward position where the U.S. has spent $100 billion to prop up what was, before the war started, everyone acknowledged the single most corrupt nation in Europe. $100 billion goes there, and it's done essentially nothing and will do nothing. So there's going to be recriminations within the United States military. There's going to be, someone's going to have to be blamed. And the real question will be, are there any people who are angry enough to raise real hell about this? I'm sure there's many very angry U.S. military people about this, many. And the question is, will this cause a shakeup within the U.S. military? Probably not, but you never know. And would that shakeup have any repercussions on the UFO UAP subject? And I say this because one thing I've noticed over the course of history is that every once in a while, when a nation goes into significant political crisis, sometimes there is a repercussion with the UFO subject, in which case important UFO information comes out. So probably the greatest example was the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, when a tremendous amount of old Soviet UFO data came out. George Knapp made a big score and got a lot of it, of some of the old KGB, what were called the blue files. But it also happened in the United States after Watergate and Vietnam. We had our own crisis, didn't cause regime change, but Nixon resigned. And before that, though, he strengthened the Freedom of Information Act, which was directly a response to Vietnam and Watergate and all of the crises. And strengthening of FOIA led to thousands and thousands of documents, UFO-related, being released. So that was a political crisis. And there have been a few other instances where the death of a longtime dictator, whether in China or in Spain, also led to the release of UFO information. So what I'm saying is, if there's a significant enough political crisis in the United States, and it could happen, because the war is not going to go the way the current administration wants it. You can take that to the bank. So when things go really, really bad, and when they are undeniably bad, when you are at the point not just of crisis but catastrophe, I wonder what will happen, and if it will have an effect on the UFO subject at all. Probably not, but it's just something to keep in mind.
It makes you wonder too. You hear people say, well, when you see a Tic Tac or something, is it ours? Is it Russia? Is it China? If Russia had UFO TAC, this would be game over a long time ago. This wouldn't be a long drawn out thing, unless you want to hide that maybe. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I agree with you. Well, let's talk about the Tic Tac case. So that's November 2004. It's almost 20 years ago now. Yeah, I mean, there's zero chance that could have been Russia or China. First of all, you look at Russia in 2004, Russia was still just recovering from the disastrous 1990s, in which their entire military basically fell to total crap. Russia's military didn't begin to start revamping until after 2008. till they had their nose blooded in Ossetia, place there in Georgia. So after that, they did a revamp, and their military is absolutely stellar at this point. But it took a while. 2004, and not just the military, but their whole tech infrastructure. There's no way Russia's going to have a tic-tac UFO. And also in 2004, Russia was very, very trying to be part of the Western alliance. Putin at that point, maybe people forget this, but he was actively seeking integration into the Western system. He was still trying to get in at that point. I think he was starting to realize the West didn't want him in, but he was trying. So there's no way Russia would have done anything like that. And China, even less so. China, they've got very good technical capabilities now, and they had decent capabilities in 2004, but nothing like what could account for a tic-tac UFO. Some people believe that it could have been U.S. black budget. I remember early on, I had a little bit of a private argument with Jimmy Church, who did, I think, believe that. I never bought that. I just never thought that was a possibility. It's not that we don't have radically advanced black budget tech. It's possible, but tic-tac, I don't think so. And I've never seen any hint that that's anything that we're making. I think that this was, and keep in mind something, when Fravor and his people encountered that object out there, there were two objects. It wasn't just one. Apparently there was an underwater object that was quite large.
Like a docking station or something, right?
It was a USO. It was an underwater, fairly substantially large object.
That's the next note on my page here, USO.
Oh, yeah. I had it down here too. Yeah.
Segued beautifully. Let's talk about USOs.
Well, yeah, this is something that I've been, everyone who's not interested in underwater UFOs or USOs. It's a fascinating subject. But about a year ago, I have a website. It's called Richard Dolan Members, and it's got a really active community. I've got really great members there. I love those people. And somehow, I can't remember, but I think someone asked about a UFO sighting in a place called Adak, Alaska. And if you ever look at where Adak is, you look at the Alaska, and then there's the Aleutian Islands that come all the way out into the Pacific. And the Aleutian Islands stand way out. I mean, almost reaching Russia. As you get toward the end of the Aleutian Islands, truly in the middle of nowhere, you find this little rock called Adak, or is it Adak Island? It's a rock. But the U.S., during the Cold War, the United States actually did have a base there because it was in the proximity of the Soviet Union. But anyway, there was a pretty well-known USO encounter from 1945. In the summer of 1945. So the U.S., Europe, let me just say the Allied powers were still at war with Japan. U.S. was at war with Japan. The European war was over at this point. And there was a story. In fact, I've got this. Let me see if I can pull this up in front of me. Do I have this? Yes, I do. Okay, good. Yeah, so this was investigated in the 60s by Dr. James McDonald, who is a very famous UFO legend. And he interviewed a guy named Robert Crawford, who was a radio man aboard the U.S. transport ship. It was called the Delaroff, and it was headed back to Seattle, and it was near Adak. And they had this bizarre, it was around sunset. They're in the open sea, and an object appeared seemingly coming out of the water. The only thing about it is that no one apparently saw it literally come out of the water, but they did see it low over the water, rising until it rose to a higher altitude. It was about a mile away. At sea, when there's nothing else to be seen, that's pretty close by when you really think about it. So it was, the sun was setting, it was getting kind of dark, but they saw this object perfectly against the sunset. It was circular. They thought it was maybe 200 feet in diameter. As it goes straight up, it makes a turn, and it circles around their ship 2 or 3 times. Crawford said this to McDonald. he said it wasn't super fast. He said maybe about 100 miles per hour, kind of a leisurely speed for an airborne object. But he said what was remarkable about it is that its speed was totally uniform. There was no oscillation. It was absolutely a solid movement. And then it just flew away and it disappeared. And I think it left a couple of flashes of light in its wake. So I looked into that. I did a bit of a presentation on that for my website. And that just got me on to a series. I just, from that point onward, I've just done a lot of USO research where I've done, I've researched the history of USOs fully in the 20th century and in the 21st century. And I've just collected, I should count, but it's well over 100 good USO reports with a lot of detail, good citations. And I am actually writing a book on it. So I hope to have that done maybe the first half of this year. But it's an absolutely fascinating subject. And what, one of the things that comes out to me is that the United States Navy, among other navies, but certainly the U.S. Navy, has had numerous encounters with these types of objects, many. These are mostly unofficial reports. So it's not, these are not things you're going to find from Freedom of Information. These are things that come from U.S. Navy personnel, and they might report it to the National UFO Reporting Center, or they might report it to MUFON, or they might report it to George Filer, one of my heroes of Filer's Files. George has been collecting UFO reports for years, but they get out there, and I've just been collecting them from every good source that I can, and I'm putting them together into a book, and it's an absolutely fascinating thing. You think 70% of the world is covered in water.
Yeah.
We've mapped, from what I understand, the tiniest portion of the ocean floor. So what is down there? What's down there?
Yeah, I think we know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own oceans.
Could
right?
be.
Yeah.
It could be. Yeah. I don't think it's difficult. The environment going down there, you think it's only 2 to 3 miles down to the bottom of an ocean floor. Trenches, of course, are deeper, but basically the bottom of the Pacific Ocean is about 15,000 feet, about 3 miles. 3 miles, you could walk that, except you get down to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean and the pressures are so intense, they just crush you like a paper cup.
Long before the bottom, you experienced that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's a very daunting environment. And forget, divers, my God. I think I was reading, if you dive anywhere close to that depth, it takes, you could get down to a deep, deep level in a short period of time, but it could take you hours, many, many, many hours, like more than 12 hours, I think, safely to rise to the surface, because
otherwise you get nitrogen bubbles, right, in your blood.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're done. So it's a very, very dangerous process. Very careful. You have to be tricky. So we don't easily get down there, but there are USO encounters that have consistently, and I would say with a lot of reliability and in a lot of detail, been reported. And they're not all from 1945. Some of them are, from the last decade. Can I tell you one from
of course
2012? This
Absolutely.
is just like a typical one. And I collected this one. I think I got this one from Filer's Files. And there's a group out in the Northwest called UFOs Northwest. I think it's run by a guy named Bill Puckett. Yes. Bill Puck, he collects a lot of these. So this one took place on April 10th, 2012, at a place called Cannon Beach in Oregon, not far from where you guys are. So you're out in British Columbia. It's a little bit south of you on the west coast of the U.S. So this is 2012 in April. And this is where 2 cousins are fishing. They're off the coast. They say they're 12 miles out off the coast. It's about 5 p.m. in April. That means it's light out. There's a lot of light. They hear a faint, high-pitched hum. They said it was like a tuning fork, if you can imagine that. They said the volume reduced down to a low hum in 30-second intervals. And it cycled like this for about 6 minutes. What struck me about that observation is how exact it is and how unusual it is. If you want to hoax a UFO report, would you think to say that? It sounded like a tuning fork. It had 30-second intervals. I wouldn't think so. They said they noticed seabirds screeching, seemingly confused, and then heading back to land. And one of the guys said, our compass was spinning like a top. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. They decided to leave. The high-pitched noises returned, and the water, this is according to their testimony, the water near the boat raised up. They said not like a bubbling, but like a flowing. So again, a very specific detail. They saw these bluish lights under the water, and then a craft surfaced. They said it rose to about 30 feet above the water. They said it was about the size of a baseball diamond, shaped like a V. They said the humming became higher until they could not hear the hum. And within a few seconds, this thing just flew off. They said it popped like a flash bulb and was gone. And then the follow-up was the air smelled like a salty arc welding odor. I have to visualize it.
It's like ozone almost. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe right. They got ill in the aftermath. Not the only time we've heard of this type of an after effect. One guy, one witness said, my hair is falling out. I don't know how much. He said, my cousin's gums are bleeding. And he was either losing his teeth or his teeth were getting loose or whatever. So Bill Puckett looked into this, and I think he found it credible. He put his own support behind it. And it's just one case. It's like, okay, I don't have a Freedom of Information Act document that says the Navy investigated this, and we probably never will. What we are left with is witness testimony. But what I look for are witness testimonies kind of like this, that are specific, that have details, that, you know, I won't know any better than you guys are going to know. Did it really happen? But I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yes, I think it happened. I think that most of these witnesses, there are people who, for whatever reason, like to just tell a tall tale, but I think that's quite rare for the most part. I think most of these witnesses are quite sincere. I personally have spoken to many, many UFO witnesses, and the vast majority have always struck me as totally sincere, and just like this report did. So it's a hell of a story. It's like this V object comes out of the water and just shoots off. What is it that's off the coast of Cannon Beach, Oregon? I might wonder. Is there a base down there? I really don't know. But I do think there's a tremendous amount of activity going on in this world that we are not really very cognizant of. The reports are out there. I find, for my part, very few UFO researchers really bother to look into these reports. People are talking about disclosure and what the Navy is going to say, and you know, what's the latest iteration of the UAP task force or the Arrow group. Well, those are interesting to know, but the fact is, here's what's not being discussed: the fact that there are countless, thousands every year of good UFO sightings that take place every year around the world. Most of the world does not have a reporting infrastructure to handle it, so we don't get too many of the reports. We know that they're out there. Some of them filter to North America, whether it's the National UFO Reporting Center or maybe MUFON. Most of them don't. But I think there's a lot of activity going on. We never really talk about it. You know, what does it mean when these objects rise out of the water? Do we have any discussion of the implications of what this means? Well, it's quite significant. UFOs are not just a problem of something that's out there. Whatever they are, whoever they are here. They're on the ground. They're in the oceans. They're in the water. They're another thing that I love studying are these very bizarre but consistent reports of low flying objects in the dead of night at 2 a.m, 3 a.m, over residential areas, over people's homes at ultra low altitude, 100 feet, 200 feet. Almost not visible, but they're visible. Typical report, a guy will say, I couldn't sleep, I went outside to have a cigarette, or my dog needed to go outside, or some reason they had to go out. It's 2:30 in the morning. And he said, they would say, I'm out there and I look up and I see this, usually it'd be like a black triangle. Sometimes it's a disc-shaped object. And typically they would say it was in silhouette, but I was able to see it. I saw it. It wasn't easy. And then sometimes people will describe a light coming down from it. And they'll often say it was over my neighbor's home or over my home. And most of the time they'll just glide off. Well, what is that?
Yeah.
What is that? There are many. Most UFO reports are not of that type, but a certain number are, and they are consistently of that type. And I just sure as hell would like to know who's operating those objects. Is that a black budget military thing? Is that the Russians? Is that the Chinese? Somehow I don't think so. Who is it? And what are they doing? To me, these are some of the most burning questions that I have right now. Well, there's UFO subject never lacks for burning questions, but the USOs and the low-flying overflights over people's homes are two things that I am just convinced need a broader discussion. These are things that will never come up in Congress. They're not going to be discussed. These are very, very uncomfortable things to talk about. And I just think it's not going to happen.
But, I often, we mentioned this a few times actually on the podcast, but, this study of this phenomenon, it's almost like a 4-year course that you would take at university or something, just to get the basics of it all, because it expands, right? Once you, like you mentioned, you go down the rabbit hole, you're like, all of a sudden you're, looking at the abduction phenomenon. One of the things that I don't like about this new report is I find it very narrow-minded in its research, because it's saying anything that's air, space, and notice that they say space after air, not space first, because they don't want to give the illusion that they're investigating UFOs or aliens in all domains, right? It bugs me.
And it says resolution.
Oh, well, the arrow one, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the resolution.
Like as if they're going to resolve this somehow. It's the resolution office.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
think highly of yourselves, don't you?
Yeah. But yeah, and that, like, it bugs me because they're not looking at the phenomenon of abduction, which, that is when the occupants of a craft that is unknown is now in the domain of somebody else, right? It's not in the domain of space. It's in somebody's house at this point, or there's an interaction of some sort. They're not investigating that. The other one that they don't investigate are saying, oh, there's no health risks according to UFOs and flight risk or whatever. There hasn't been no medical issues. Bullshit. There's been plenty of documented cases of people being sick.
Talk to John Burroughs.
Yeah.
We have him on next week, actually. We will do just that.
His case is well known, and it's well known that John could have died. He was able to get medical intervention for his heart. This happened directly, it seems, directly as a result of the Rendlesham case. And I hope he gets to talk about this. His efforts to get healthcare as a result of this were very difficult. It was very difficult for him to do that. There was a tremendous amount of obstruction that was baffling. I think he was working, it was in Arizona, and at the time he was working with the office of Senator John McCain, who of course is dead now, but I think that's correct. And from what I recall, John will tell you this, but I think they were mystified at first at all of the obfuscation and obstruction they were getting from the military just to get access to John's records. But it had to do with the UFO incident that he was a part of in 1980, in which he got very close to a landed craft, and it clearly had a negative effect on his health. And by the way, in the British report known as the Condign Report, which came out in 2006, which, to my embarrassment, I was one of many people, but I did not really read that report as carefully as John did. He found in that report that they talked very explicitly about ill health effects from these UAP. They were quite explicit about it. So no, there's official evidence and official determination that these objects have very negative health effects if you under certain circumstances, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Wasn't there a lawsuit, you said, Jay? I think yesterday we were doing another show and Jason brought up the fact that there was a family that successfully sued the government because they couldn't, disprove that they were over the air at the time. And Jason knows it better than I, but
You're
Yeah, I
talking
think
about the Cash Landrum case, Jason?
yes, I think so, right? It took place in the
Yeah.
70s, and it was a little
Yeah.
boy, grandmother, and a mother in a car,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Yeah,
That
you
was
want to
19
touch up a little bit on that,
Yeah,
Richard?
that was December 1980, so very close. And they were down in a place called, I think, Huffman, Texas, or around there. And yeah, it was a lady named Betty Cash, Vicky Landrum, and the boy was named Colby Landrum. I think he was 7 at the time. He was a young guy. And they encountered a diamond-shaped glowing object as they were driving that was accompanied by a number of double-rotor helicopters, Chinook-style helicopters, quite a few. So it's very odd. So, you have to wonder, is this an experimental object that is being accompanied by U.S. military helicopters, or is it an alien UFO and these military helicopters are following it? And, a lot of people have tried to infer that, well, this is clearly something that we're making. And, for my part, I've just never found that to be a slam dunk case. I think it could go either way. But the fact was, I can't remember who was driving. I think Vicky Landrum was driving. She gets out of the car. Bad move by her, because she's directly exposed to whatever radiation this object had, which was tremendous. And in fact, if I'm remembering correctly, she tried to get back in and the door handle was so hot it burned her hand.
Yeah.
But eventually she got back in. But the aftermath of this was tremendous ill health effects. All of them, they essentially suffered severe radiation poisoning. They lived in the immediate term. And yes, they did try to get justice from the through a lawsuit, but I think they lost the lawsuit. I don't think they won. I don't think they got
Okay. I
true
may have
damages.
that on. Yeah, I may have
Made
got
it to the courts anyway, which is surprising in itself.
It did, yeah, made it to the court. Former MUFON director John Schuessler was involved in investigating this case, and he, I think was really trying to advocate for them. He's not an attorney, but I don't think they got justice on that case.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, but I don't think they did.
Well, I mean, the government would have to admit that it was either theirs or not theirs, and what the hell was it? That's
what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, the government, there was no admission from any military base having anything to do with the helicopters, and certainly no one's going to own the diamond-shaped UFO.
Yeah.
So these people were just totally out of luck.
Yeah, that's sad. That's sad. But again, when we hear about these cases, even we were talking the other night with another gentleman, and we're talking about the case in Brazil and all that, when they're being in 1977, when people are being attacked by these orbs that is causing them to be anemic or get these rare diseases. Several people died.
That's right.
When you hear stuff in the report and saying there's no ill effects from these objects, it's like, yeah, from a distance. But obviously, when they're close to us, when they're in our domain, there could be some effects, right? So, yeah, I thought that missing out of it was.
I think. I mean, the ill health effects are definitely something that's important. When I think of the full impact of the UFO phenomenon, I mean, I would have to say, I think we're talking about this goes beyond any radiation or any health effects from terahertz electromagnetic radiation or whatever else they're giving off. I would say we are dealing with a phenomenon to this day by agencies unknown, entities unknown. We've got a pretty good idea that some of them look like gray aliens and maybe a few other variations. Yes, but we don't have. I mean, think about how crazy this is. You've got a global phenomenon. Thousands. My own personal estimate, I mean, I would estimate minimum 50,000 good UFO sightings around the world every year. I would be absolutely incredulous if it were less than that. Just my own estimates when I extrapolate out what we see in North America. You have 10,000 to 12,000 confirmed raw reports every year between US and Canada. You got MUFON, you've got the National UFO Reporting Center, you've got Chris Rutkowski over up in Manitoba. He gets 1,500 to 2,000 a year. You got 10 to 12,000 specific unique reports in 2 countries every year, which comprise less than 5% of the world's population. So what's the rest of the world dealing with? They simply, it's not that they're not seeing it. They just don't have the infrastructure to report it. Only North America has a decent UFO reporting infrastructure. So I think we're dealing with a massive phenomenon. I'm not saying every report that comes in is a legitimate report, but even if you take 5%, you're still dealing with many thousands of good reports of sightings every year, I think.
Yeah.
So you've got a massive phenomenon of by entities that are clearly operating beyond anything that's supposed to exist. For what reasons? Why? Well, maybe they're I realize we're probably running out of time, but if we can go over a few minutes, I'm not going to complain. I would say, I've really tried to think this through, and I'm not saying I have every answer, but my own assessment is there has been a UFO phenomenon probably for as long as human beings have existed in this form that we have here, probably for many thousands of years. However, I don't believe that it's been all the same all this time. I do believe that in the last century or more, the phenomenon has ramped up considerably. And I say that because, people in the 19th century were very intelligent. They were very observant. They even thought about things scientifically. And you know what? They were not seeing many of these. They were not noticing many of these. But we started noticing them in the 20th century. And I think that's because they actually started to become more numerous in the 20th century. Why is that? Well, that's the easy part to answer. When you look at the long history of our species, something that I'm fascinated by, for all of our history, we're basically either hunters and gatherers for hundreds of thousands of years, or then we invent agriculture about, let's say, 10,000 years ago, and we develop riding, and we still have a society of horses pulling wooden carts. It's not like we could do much about UFOs or they could do much with us. But a couple of centuries ago, we discovered science, like serious science. That's like that long ago in the long scheme of things. We discover science, and the next thing you know, we've got railroads, we've got airplanes, we go to the moon, we've got computers, we've got nukes, we've got now strong AI, and now we've got transhumanism. Like, whoa, very fast.
Yeah.
And we're talking about things like space-time metric engineering out of nowhere. We're about to leap into their world. And do you think they don't have an inkling of that? I think we've brought in the whole galactic local neighborhood to observe what we are doing. I think they're interested in what we are doing. And maybe they think we're not going to make the transition. That's a possibility. Maybe they're collecting our DNA. I don't know all the reasons, but I do think that our transformation into something fundamentally different than what we have ever been in the past is what's getting them here. And I don't know if that transformation is good or bad, or even if those are appropriate terms to describe it. It's going to be radically different. We're going through a worldwide revolution, and it has to do with the transformation of the entire human species. So I think that that's, if there's any one reason why I think these beings are here, this has got to be it. We've often said, well, maybe because we had nukes. I think that's a very one sliver. The fact that we were able to crack the code of the atom is a symptom of what we are doing, that we are vaulting into this new state of being that's transhuman, posthuman, whatever it is, but we're moving into it. And I think that they find that interesting. Do they find it interesting as detached scientists, or do they have a stake in this in one way or another? Is a question that I sometimes ask myself. I don't have an answer yet, but the thing that I like to do at this stage, when I started out with UFOs 30 years ago, I was all about the nuts and bolts and just the facts, and I actually did not like to speculate. Well, that's all gone. I'm at a point where I'm very happy to speculate. It's very obvious when I speculate, and sometimes I'm wrong, but I feel like, what's the point of looking at all this data if you don't have a conception of what it means? And so that's what I'm trying, and I've been trying to do, is actually to understand what is going on here from a factually based, evidence-based standpoint, and to just try to figure it out as best I can.
Yeah,
Wow.
you're doing a good job, sir. And like I said, we're big fans of yours. We've been watching you on TV and reading your books for years, and it's great to be able to talk with you. Louis, do you have any final questions for our guest
Yeah,
today?
where can people follow you, Richard, if they want to get to know and hear your brilliant thoughts more? Where can people find you?
Thank you. Well, I have a YouTube channel, which is very easy for anyone to check out. It's just Richard Dolan Intelligent Disclosure is what it's called. It's out there. I put out shows not as often as you guys, but I'm out there. I put them out. I try for once a week. Usually it's every other week. And I have a website, which I think I've got indicated right by my name. And the website is richarddolanmembers.com. It is a member site, but there's a tremendous amount of free posts up there that I put. So there's a little bit of everything. I do have most of what I do is behind the paywall. It's the best model that I can engage in right now to pay my bills, but it works well, and I try to provide a lot of information for what people pay. So I do have a lot of information over at that website, and I've got my books on. Actually, I've got another website called richarddolanpress.com, which houses all of my books.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, we want to thank you for being so gracious with your time. We learned a lot, and it's the type of conversation we like to have. Yeah, a little bit of imagination, but based on fact. And as you said, if you don't speculate, how do you wrap your brain around something that's this deep or this profound? So thank you for spending an hour of your time. I know you got paying gigs, and this isn't one of them, but we do really appreciate that, and we'd love to have you back again sometime.
Have me back. I'm happy to do it.
Awesome.
I'd be happy to do it.
Thank you so much, sir.
A lot of fun. I enjoyed it very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much.